I've never had a serious illness as such, like pneumonia or cancer. Oh, sorry, I have had cancer, had prostate cancer, but fortunately it was all encapsulated and it was removed, but there was no local or distant spread. So that's gone pretty well, although it's a pretty nervous time. But I did have one life-threatening illness, if you like. It was when I injured myself with a circular saw. I talked about it elsewhere, but it's where I was stupidly had a piece of wood on the ground that I was cutting with a circular saw. Had the circular saw in my hand, put my foot at one end of the wood, and the circular saw hit a knot in the wood and bounced out, and the safety guard didn't activate, so I cut through half of my left leg and my right leg. I laugh now, but at that time I honestly thought, I looked down and there were these huge cuts and blood pumping out and that sort of thing. And threw the circular saw away. It was still going, and I basically could have died. It cut through a bunch of important things, but the main thing was blood loss. And I thought, I kept feeling my pulse and doing the clinical thing. And after about 5 minutes, I realised I wasn't going to bleed enough to go into shock and die. So it was a serious injury though, and it was serious not just because it might have killed me, but because of the agony I experienced. And I've talked about it elsewhere. There's a link in the description about the details about that incident and what I learnt about pain and suffering, and then afterwards. It was a real saga for me. And of course, like a lot of suffering, in retrospect, I learned a lot and I'm grateful for it. But yes, it was a serious injury. My favourite books. I always have trouble thinking of these, but I've loved the Ken Follett series, History of England, ancient history, medieval history, and modern history, if you like, and written really well. Very similar to James Michener, where he has details of the history, and he researches all that, but he has very interesting characters that he puts into these stories to make it live. Some of Tim Winton, all of Tim Winton's books I've loved, such as Cloud Street and Dirt Music. I love reading his books. I love books where the words are like music and it just flows. When I read on holidays, at least, I read a lot of page turners like spy novels and that sort of thing, crime. Just as a page turner, but to get me out of work mode. But people like Tim Winton, and also Marcus Zusak, The Book Thief book, and Margaret Atwood, for example, The Blind Assassin. They write words beautifully. They string them together beautifully. Shantaram, that's another book I just thought of that I loved, mostly because I had lived in that sort of part of India, travelled and knew. I could just almost smell the smells of the place when I read that book, Shantaram. Another Australian book that I've loved is a book called The Secret River by Kate Grenville, and other books by her. But honestly, I don't read much non-fiction. I don't read much fiction or non-fiction at all during the year. It's just when I'm on holidays I go to town, and I've probably read on this particular holiday about a dozen books. What are my 5 favourite movies? Well, when I was young, my favourite movie probably, I saw it 3 times, was The Sound of Music. A lot of people love that story when I was just like 12 years or 13 years of age. I love High Noon, that's probably my favourite Western. And I loved Bridge on the River Kwai. Bridge on the River Kwai, that was another great story that I loved. In later life, movies that I've loved, I loved Gandhi. again, because it's around India and I could smell the smells and hear the noises of the bazaar sitting in the cinema. A Japanese movie called Melody in Grey. I love Titanic, not just for the effects, but thought it's a brilliant movie. The Godfather series, I loved all of them. Forrest Gump, Shawshank Redemption, Casablanca. I think they're on everybody's list, and I love them too. I do like movies, and there's probably lots more I could name, but they're the ones I'll name as an adult that I've loved. Five things that everyone should experience. Well, it's kind of hard to say should, because you either do or don't get a chance, but I guess from my perspective, I think winning a special sporting event as a team is such a joy, much better than as an individual. And even individual sports, like the Olympics, they function as a team. Everyone sort of wins when somebody wins. And it could be as a spectator, but it could be as a coach, could be as a support person, or it could be as a participant. But winning a sporting event as a team is definitely a high moment, and everyone should experience it, not just because of the joy of the memory, but the learning of teamwork. Something else that everyone should, I think, experience is receiving hugs from children. It's just, when my children have hugged me, or my grandchildren, it's just like the best time. I remember coming home from work. I used to walk home from work, and the three kids when they were little were like 7, 4 and 1 or 2 or something, and they were playing on the front lawn, and they saw me walking, and they all ran down to say hello. And my oldest son Simon, I was hugging him there, and then Scott there, and then little Amy came toddling along in her nappy or a diaper. And she kind of took off, but she took off too soon to come up. She would have crashed into the path. So I reached out and grabbed her. And I stood there with 3 kids all hugging me at the same time. And I thought, in life, it probably doesn't get any better than this. And then there was another time more recently when my little Mimi, my next door neighbour granddaughter, she was up early and she was out the front, and I was up early we live next door, and I was having coffee, and she saw me and she toddled down the path, opened the gate, walked around, came up, and then jumped up on my lap and snuggled into me, and I gave her a hug. It doesn't have to be your own kids. It could be your grandkids or whatever, but receiving hugs from children is a great affirmation. It's great for them, of course, but I don't know, I just feel like it's a great experience. A third thing that I think, this is a bit more, not controversial, but personal, but deep spiritual moments are something that it's great if you can experience them. For me, as a Christian, they are a particular, I guess, type of spiritual moment. But other people have deep spiritual moments. I guess what I'm thinking of is that without them, life can be maybe missing something. And how that plays out in people's lives varies, but to have deep spiritual moments and to seek spirituality, I think, is something everyone should have in life. The fourth thing I would name of the 5 is the love of a partner. Jackie and I have been together now for 48 years since our first date, and we do love each other. And it is like every marriage, it's got its speed bumps and rocks and all that sort of stuff, but to have the love of a partner and to know that love is there is a great thing to experience. Now, not everyone has a partner, but certainly the love of some significant other is a great thing in life. And again, best considered, I think, if you don't have that, and there are a lot of lonely people in life. A significant other, it might be a really close friend or mentor or somebody, but to know that there's someone out there who loves you, who'll be there for you, is a wonderful thing. Another thing, I don't know if this is a should, it's just quite personal, but desert sunsets are special. And we've had plenty of those. Desert or rural sunsets because the sun sets for us in Western Australia, the sun sets over the ocean, which has its own majesty. And when we go on our camping trips, every night it's spectacular, red, orange. But in Perth we get a lot of those red sunsets as well. And it may not be a sunset, it may be something else. I guess if you lived up in the north of Scandinavia, it might be the Northern Lights. I don't know, but it's just something about it. And one that just springs to mind is we were camping in the desert with my brother and some other people, and we pulled up near some rocks called Kata Tjuta, the Olgas, Kata Tjuta. And we found a campsite, which my brother knew about already, had been there before, and he said, I'll get the fire going, you guys just walk down there and you'll find a sloping bit of rock and you'll be able to watch the sunset on Kata Tjuta. So we were just yakking and we all sort of sat down, and as the sun set, the rock went from its normal red colour to a purple colour, and it was actually quite mystical. It was stunning, and we found that none of us talked. We just sat there watching in awe. We imagined the First Nations people as they came down from up north and saw this for the first time, and we're guessing that every time they saw it, it would have warmed their hearts. Something in nature, like a desert sunset or a sunset on a rock, or I don't know, there's something everyone should experience. What does it do? I don't know, it's just a sense of awe and wonder, I think. Anything that creates a sense of awe and wonder, I think, is a thing that everyone should experience in life. I mean, I do, looking up at the stars, for example, thinking about the universe, always have from when I was a kid. For everyone this is different, but for me I feel like experiencing something like that is what everyone should be able to do. Let me add one other thing that everyone should experience. Actually, this was my wife's suggestion. It's great if you can find your gift and use that gift. And it might be, you might be a singer, which I am not, absolutely not one of my gifts. It might be, I don't know, it can be simple. Lots of service type gifts of being kind to people, helping street kids. I don't know, all sorts of gifts. People have different gifts. But once you find that gift and use it, you get a great joy from it. And again, best thought about in the opposite. If you never find your gift and you keep doing things that aren't your gift, it's not quite as fulfilling. One secret that nobody else knows. Well, obviously, if I had one, I wouldn't say it anyway. I don't really have any particular secrets. But I do have, obviously, a lot based on my profession as a doctor. Confidentiality is a standard part of medicine, and I've heard all sorts of things from patients that I can't pass on. And I won't even give an example of the sorts of things. But patients know, and they need to know, that it's rock solid confidential. As when I talk to friends, when they say this is confidential, it's no problem for me to keep it confidential. I hold a lot of confidential information in here, and I'm never really tempted to gossip about them. And I do hear people sometimes talking about something, but I know the fact. I don't jump in. And even if people ask me, I say, oh no, I'm not at liberty to talk about that. I'm not at liberty to talk about anything I know about that. And some people feel like they've got a sense of power if they have secrets. This is the driving force behind gossip. I don't feel that. Confidential. I guess it's been indoctrinated into me from when I was a medical student that confidentiality is a key factor of being a doctor, and so it's kind of second nature to us. What's my legacy? How would I like to be remembered? Somebody asked me this a few years ago, and it was like a blinding flash. I don't actually care to be remembered. I'm not doing anything to be remembered. This doesn't worry me. I mean, many times we've discovered something and someone else discovers it 10 years later and publishes it, and people say, why don't you get upset about it? I say, well, why? Everyone's trying to help discover things that help people. I don't need to be remembered for the original discovery. Why? Why do I feel that way? I guess because I am aware that no one's going to really remember you anyway. And people who do things to be remembered, well, you're going to be in the grave anyway, so what's the point? I think of Mozart. I died at the age of 32 or something. He's in some unmarked grave in Vienna. His music is loved by so many people, including me, but he doesn't know about it. What's the point of his being remembered? So I don't really think about it. Being in a world of life and death, I don't really think about it. But if I was pushed, how would you like to be remembered? I think it wouldn't be for any discovery or anything in particular, but as having lived a life of integrity. Sometimes people accuse you of lacking integrity, and partly that's to get under your skin if they're annoyed with you. But I have always, I think, been a person of integrity, deep integrity, including integrity of thought. That I've been a man who's lived in grace, that I've respected people, even if I don't get respect back again. That's grace. And I hope people feel kindness and compassion from me. They say, oh yes, Bruce was kind and cared about me. And that especially applies to my kids, my role as a dad and grandfather, but also as a husband. I mean, hey, I'm so imperfect that I wouldn't even want to take time to bore you with that, and I'm sure anyone could list a bunch of my imperfections, but I hope that I'm remembered as someone who sought to be a person of integrity, grace, and compassion. Near-death experiences. Well, most people haven't had too many of these or any, but I seem to have had a lot, and I should be grateful. So I've been asked to describe some of them, so here's the first one. Not in chronological order, but just off the top of my head. I had 3 motorbike accidents in Papua New Guinea. I bought a motorbike, cheap motorbike, because that was the only way to get around, really. And had some other near misses, but one in particular, I was pretty sure this was it. I was riding along a gravel, winding mountain road up in Papua New Guinea, and I'd been doing it for 6 hours or something, and had dust in my eyes, and I missed a corner, and I went over a cliff. It wasn't a sheer cliff, it was probably 80 degrees or 70 degrees, I don't know what it was, but it went down, and I could see, as I went over, I could see the tops of trees, so I knew it was a long way down. So I thought, well, this is it. This is how I'm going to end my life. I was 24 years of age. And as I went over, I looked at that slope, and I thought, if I kept some speed up, I could go down that slope, because I'd seen it in the movies. And I stayed on the motorbike, and I got to the bottom, and there were trees, and so I obviously had some speed up then, so I dodged between the trees and went about, 30, 40 metres before I stopped. And I thought, well, I'm alive, and haven't hit any tree, and I'm still sitting on the motorbike. So I turned the motorbike around, I looked, and of course there's this huge slope back up to the road. And I'm in the middle of nowhere on my way up to Mount Hagen, in the middle of nowhere by myself. So I thought, no, I'm stuck, because I can't get up that slope. And I thought, what about if I went back with my motorbike, picked a nice run, got up some speed, where there was a gap between the trees, and then tried to go up the hill at speed. I might be able to get there, but it's a disaster. Of course, if you don't get there, it's a disaster, because you fall off, and if you're not careful, the motorbike will fall with you, and down you go, and you get crunched again. So I got up the fastest I could on the earth, and up I went, zzz. And as I got near the top, I was still going. I thought, I'm going to make it. And when I got to the lip of the cliff, the motorbike went into the air and then clunked down onto the ground. And I was still on the bike. So I put my left foot on the road, and I thought, this is amazing. This is like the movies. And the thing I remember is, apart from the fact that I was still alive, was that there were some Papua New Guineans running down the hill. There's about 8 or 10 of them who'd been walking and seen me go over the cliff, and they were running down the hill to look at the mess. Looking along this fellow man, you got plenty bloody stuff. Anyway, when I jumped up and landed on the road, I looked up, and they all kind of stopped and and was shocked. Etched in my memory forever. I've had some more near-death experiences, which, we've been asked to talk about them. Another one was on Mount Kilimanjaro in early 1993, and me and my friend Mark were climbing, and we were at about 17,500 feet or so, maybe a bit more. And we left at midnight and a blizzard had hit, but we kept going up. That's a whole other story. People were coming down, but we decided we'd keep going up for various reasons. But here's the thing. We didn't have crampons or ice axes or anything. It was just like snow everywhere and blizzard, and we didn't expect this and we didn't prepare for it. And to get up, it's like 45 degrees, so you had to kick your boots into the snow and get a foothold, and then then another one, and then another one. And then I kicked my boot into a foothold, and the foothold gave way. So I started to slide down the mountain. So I rolled over onto my back, and I contemplated that I would hit Kibo Hut, which is down at about 15,000 feet, a bit over, at terminal velocity. That's what I was thinking. And I calculated this, and I saw a rock, and I aimed to slide into the rock. And I slid into the rock, and I bent my knees up to cushion the blow. Anyway, and so I slid into the rock, bent my knees up, and stopped. And I thought, wow, I could have died. And the funny thing is, Mark and I talked about this afterwards, because he had a similar kind of scary incident later on, about 20 minutes later. He said, but I thought, I was pretty cool, calm and collected. I'm used to doing that in medicine. People's heart stops in front of you. He said I had a look of terror on my face. That was the reality. I'm glad he told me that, actually. But anyway, that was a near-death experience. The third one occurred when I was about 16 years old. Me and some mates decided to go surfing at Scarborough Beach. Not a good beach for surfing. I mean, we weren't good surfers anyway. We just had some boards and stuff. And it was a shocking day, and the big sea breeze was in. It was overcast, and the waves were churning, and we had to go anyway. Anyway, they went up to get a Coca-Cola at the shops, and I said, I'll just give it a few more goes and then I'll join you. Well, stupidly, I pushed the board in. The board then was carried by the waves in and stopped on the beach. Stupid thing to do, because you can break the fin. That's not the point. Then I tried to just body surf in, but the problem is, and I was used to body surfing, that the waves were big enough, huge actually, and they were coming fast, and I thought I'll be in straight into the beach. But there was a massive undertow, and as I tried to go into the beach, the undertow was pulling me back, so I was stuck. And every time I got stuck, I had to look around for the big waves, and I had to take a breath and duck under them. Otherwise, I'd have been mincemeat. So I kept taking a breath and ducking under, but every time I ducked under, I'd get carried further out, and so I tried to body surf in again. And by now, especially paddling the surfboard, I was completely exhausted. And then the disaster happened. I ducked under a wave, but as I came up, there was another massive wave immediately behind it, and I had to duck under it, but I had no time to catch my breath. I went, and I got belted, and I was tumbling like I was in a washing machine. And I was under the water and tumbling, and I didn't know which way was up, and I thought, well, this is it. Everyone at school's going to read in the paper tomorrow that Bruce Robinson drowned they were terrible conditions. We should never have done it. And I was tumbling. I had no idea where the surface was. But finally, what happened? I broke the surface. I remember I broke the surface, and took that beautiful, blissful breath of air. And I noticed something a bit weird. I looked, waiting for the wave to belt me, but I noticed that the waves were all to my right, breaking over there. What had happened was I tumbled, and the undertow had carried me out behind the waves, behind the break. So I floated around on my back for a while. My mates still hadn't, I think I waved, but there were no surf lifesavers and my mates weren't there, so that was a waste of time. Waved for help. But I remembered something, and I give my sister Sandy credit for this. She was always very chatty at the meal table, and she talked about her surf lifesaving course where they said whenever you get into an undertow, people drown because they try to swim against it. But it's always a certain width, and if you just swim sideways, you can then come ashore where the undertow doesn't exist. So I did that, and I went north. On Scarra still remember this. I went north until I could feel no undertow, and the waves were not as tippy too at that point. And then I caught a wave in without the undertow. I was able to body surf into the beach, and I remember collapsing face down on the beach, utterly exhausted and realising I'd nearly died. And I sort of crawled up a bit further away from the waves into the sand, and I just lay there exhausted. My mates came with their Coca-Colas. Where you been? It's kind of hard to explain to them that I'd nearly died. That's number 3. Another near-death experience was actually windsurfing. And with windsurfing, you can get into a lot of trouble, but when you're experienced, you can get out of trouble. And one of the things that can happen is you get caught and you get catapulted. You got the sail, holding the sail in your hand. If you just get the wrong angle, whatever, you get catapulted. And this happened to me. But sadly, A, I wasn't experienced enough, and B, I had an old windsurfing board. Anyway, I got turned around, and the harness line wrapped itself around the hook, and I couldn't. Normally, you just release it and get out, but it was wrapped around. So I was tied under the sail. I was stuck under the sail. The sail was filling up with water, and I couldn't get out from under it. But then, again, minor miracle, the water was just deep enough, and I was just tall enough that my feet touched the sand, and I had about, if I was 6 inches shorter, I would have died. But I was able to push my head up through the sail, push my head up under the sail, and create an air pocket. And then I got some breath, and then was able to untangle the harness line, which was just a rope harness line, honestly, early days of windsurfing. And now I know, of course, that you don't use a rope harness line, and if you get catapulted, or first of all, that can't happen nowadays because you have a different sort of harness line. And secondly, if you get caught under the sail, you don't try to guess where to swim out. You grab the boom and feed it in front of you, so you end up at the end of the boom. But if that water had been deeper, or I hadn't been so tall, good night. I also had a circular saw injury, which I've described elsewhere, which could have killed me. What about driving a car? Yeah, I fell asleep once driving home, and always small hours of the day, but fortunately it was on a road near our house which had no cars coming the other way, and I crossed the road and was heading towards the railway line and just woke up. I guess the car was rumbling on the dirt, and I straightened up. Once driving from Galway to Dublin, I was trying to pass a truck in a hire car. In those days there were no motorways. This is 1976. And I looked ahead and there was no cars coming, so I pulled out and I started to pass the truck. But ahead of me there had been a dip in the road, and a car was in that dip. There was no sign saying don't pass, or maybe there was, I couldn't tell in the rain. And I'm now next to the truck, and there's a car coming straight at me in the rain. So I hit the brakes, and the car does one of these fishtails, because I'm a wet road, I'm hitting the brakes. And unbelievably, the car then fishtailed and just fell in behind the truck. I took my foot off the brake and the car started to move forward, and I thought, this is amazing. I look like I know how to drive, but this was just a fluke. Anyway, I've had I don't know, I'm lucky to be alive, obviously, but what impact did near-death experiences have on me? Probably not a lot. When I was young, I'd think, what's the chances? Aren't I lucky? I think the Kilimanjaro experience was a bit irresponsible, probably. I don't know. It didn't seem like it when we went to go up, and then it's just a hike really. It's pretty demanding. It goes up 18,000, 19,000 feet or whatever. We didn't expect it to be a problem. And then when the blizzard hit and the snow got deep, it seemed easier to keep going up than to go down, because it's easier to slip when you go down, when you think about it. If you had banana skins on a flight of stairs, would you think it's safer to sort of crawl up or to walk down where you can slip at any time? I don't know, I guess near-death experiences haven't impacted me as deeply as you might imagine, but I certainly, first of all, I do have an attitude of gratitude in life, probably largely independent of those things, but also a sense of purpose. You know, what am I made for? Where can I make a difference, which I talk about elsewhere. But anyway, in answer to the question, near-death experiences, I've had plenty. My favourite meal is probably hot spicy food with some good wine that matches the food. People imagine that I like to eat steak and apple pie, which is true, but I really like interesting food and interesting wine. And I do like spicy food for some reason, often a lot spicier than others. One of the things that happens up in Indonesia, I just thinking about one of our trips where we used to have to travel for 3 hours, and then on the way back they found there was a restaurant. Obviously, and it was quite late at night, because find a restaurant, and I'm with a team of say 20 Indonesians or 10 Indonesians, and they don't speak English, and they get the food, and then they come and ask me, and I say this word lebih pedas, which is extra spice, and they look at the Indonesians sitting around me and say, look, he's a foreigner, so he's probably got the wrong word. He probably means less, and they say no, he likes it even spicier than us. I think I learnt that in Nepal and India when I was young. I just love spicy food, interesting spices and interesting flavours. And the same with wine. I love wine that's got interesting flavour. If I could get front row seats to any musician, living or dead, who would it be? Okay, so I initially thought of the Beatles. But then I thought, this is ridiculous, because there's people screaming all around you and you can't hear them. In fact, some close friends of mine in England, they go to see, there's a Beatles cover band that's come out that sound exactly like the Beatles, but there's no screaming. And they say, realistically, you would never have heard the Beatles performing if it was live. So I've changed my mind on that one. I've always been a great Bob Dylan fan. I don't go to his concerts now. He sings modern stuff and doesn't do his old stuff. But in those early days, Woodstock, etc., the folk festivals, I'd have loved to have sat in the front row and listened to Dylan. Same with Joan Baez. Jackie's a great fan of Joan Baez, same era. Simon and Garfunkel, always loved them. The famous Central Park concert, that would have been lovely. But we have been to a Simon and Garfunkel concert, so not so compelling about that. By the way, I don't always think that front row is great. We went to hear Neil Diamond. No, it wasn't. It was Don McLean. And we just bought some tickets. Turned out to be front row seats. It wasn't as great as I'd hoped, because I love Don McLean's songs. As a young adult, I always loved singing them, still do. But there's two problems. Number one, the speakers were mostly at the front rather than spread around. So we got blasted. And that distorts the concert. And secondly, the woman next to me, she knew all the songs, and so she's singing in my ear. I'm trying to listen to Don McLean singing, and she's singing in my ear. And I thought, I don't want to tell her, because I don't want to spoil her fun. She's enjoying it. So front row seats to concerts aren't always what they're made out to be. But we've seen a lot of people. We've recently seen also, before he passed on, Leonard Cohen. That was a great concert, and Rod Stewart. A lot of concerts. Joan Armatrading, but lots of them. So, but I don't go to every concert automatically. Sometimes they're better than others. I like to listen to the music with headphones, I think. What's different about the world now compared to when I was young? Obviously, everyone's going to say computing and the internet, the fact that you can get GPS in most places and go anywhere you like without needing a map. You can communicate, get any information you want straight away. You can Google navigate it, click on a restaurant, get their opening times. Who would have ever thought you could do that? And of course, the internet is good and bad. There's all sorts of good things, especially in medicine, educating patients and all sorts of things. But lots of bad things, social media, etc. But anyway, I'm not talking about them now. But that's certainly something that I never would have thought of. When I was a young student, the physics department had a computer. It was one of those computers that whirly. The whole room was occupied by this computer with transistors. Remember the early days of portable computers, and I bought one. So different now. A second thing that I guess I took for granted when I was young, but it's a shame now, is the loss of values. Values like integrity and respect seem to just disappeared. Not disappeared, but they're just not as prominent. They were sort of de rigueur when we were young. We all respected police and teachers, even if we didn't agree with them, but disrespect for school and teachers and the elderly and police is much more common now. One of my kids is a school teacher, and it's terrible to hear what he has to deal with, not just from students but from their young parents. So loss of values, who'd have predicted that? I took it for granted back then that everyone would have these values, but no. Integrity is another one. Integrity was, I guess I was indoctrinated with integrity, do the right thing. Be a person of integrity. Even a simple thing like I went to the checkout at the hospital cafeteria. I gave them $10 for something that cost $5, and they gave me $15 change. And I said, you've made a mistake. I only gave you a $10 note, not a $20 note. And they said, oh, sorry, I lost concentration. But then they said something which broke my heart. They said, people don't do that sort of thing now. Honesty like that, people don't do it now. And they say, if you can get away with it, what's wrong with it? So again, I'm not criticising anyone or lamenting too much here. I'm just saying that from when I was young to now, that's been a major change. I guess the third thing would be how easy it is to travel anywhere. I remember seeing my grandparents, or I should say my grandmother, after my pop died, getting on a boat to go to visit England. I guess it was 6-8 weeks, and now you can just get on a plane, fly non-stop from my city to London, Perth, other side of the world. You can go anywhere you like, and there are ways of travelling which are pretty cheap. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is, travel is so much easier now than it used to be. And I remember the first jet landing in my city, and planes used to have to go to England. They have to stop in India and somewhere else and refuel, etc. But now it's amazing, and that has been something I would never have predicted when I was young. I learned a number of things becoming a parent that I guess I never quite appreciated. One is softness. I guess I've grown up with, as good as my parents were, there was that sort of, do it, you've got a duty, a responsibility, etc. A lot of love, but not so much softness, I don't think. Maybe my parents were probably a little bit softer than others. I know some of my friends used to say, I wish my dad behaved like your dad, and most of the mums were pretty soft, not all of them. But I grew up in a world of coaches, footy coaches, get out there, So with kids, they just melt my heart. And so I've learnt what it's like to feel that vulnerable, that soft in your heart towards kids. I always likened it to put some butter in a microwave and it melts straight away. That's me with my kids, and grandkids, kids-in-law. Softness. I've also learnt vulnerability. I guess I've always been vulnerable like a man always is. You don't declare your feelings that easily. It's just not a man thing to do. Generally, a normal distribution, of course. You make yourself vulnerable. But with kids, you just can't help it. You're just vulnerable. And I used to walk to school with the with my kids, and I remember once, I don't know which one it was, but I think it might have been Amy, my third child, and I walked to school with them, and then she'd walk through the gate and walk across the playground with a little backpack on and school uniform on, probably just 6 years of age, something like that. And I'd continue walking down to the hospital, but I leant on the fence and I looked at Amy and I thought, there goes one of my 3 kids, and I am so vulnerable to anything happening to them. It would smash me. Vulnerability, you just can't help but being vulnerable, and I've learnt vulnerability. And it's kind of not the end of the world, although it's you've got to make sure it doesn't create a tendency to catastrophise about them. But I think getting married too, you're vulnerable. I mean, we've had a good marriage, so I remember being, as a young man, frightened of being vulnerable to the things that can happen in a relationship. I don't know why actually, but anyway, back to the parenting. I just learnt vulnerability. It's the joy and pain of the whole thing. A third thing I've learnt, unquestionably, is tolerance. This, I don't know, I just went into parenting assuming the kids would be like me and Jackie, and then boom, 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 straight forward. Probably everyone does. But you have to tolerate the fact that the kids are not the same as you. They're all different to each other, and they're all different to you. They're different in their skills, they're different in their emotions, and they're different in their life experiences. And you have to remove expectations, be tolerant to the fact that the kids are wonderfully unique. Each of the kids is wonderfully unique, with a wonderfully unique set of emotions and skills and life experiences, and celebrate their uniqueness, celebrate that uniqueness, and be tolerant of it. That's something else I've learned. What would I hope to accomplish? Well, we're working on a cancer vaccine. I think that's definitely one thing. I'd like to see that develop to the point where it's effective in patients. I mean, the beauty of it is it targets mutations. Sounds easier than it is, but the idea is to wake up the immune system to mount an attack against cancer. We learnt early on that it would never work by itself, but with other clever additions into the therapy, we might have a nice little army of treatments that could cure cancer, or cure a lot of patients with cancer. Who do I consider to be my best friends now? I am very fortunate. So, first of all, my wife is a great friend. We have a good friendship, and we talk a lot, we do a lot together. I also have 3 very close friends. In answer to the question, I'll state who they are. One of them is Dr. Peter Proud, who's a retired educationalist. We meet every week, and he's been a very close friend for a long time. We look out for each other. I have 2 medical best friends, Mark Edwards, a retired heart surgeon, and Peter LeSuef, a professor of paediatrics. We've been friends since we were young medical students or doctors, and we all know each other's kids. And here's the thing about these 3 friends. I know they'll always be there for me. One of the worst times in the last 10 years was when Jackie got breast cancer, and it was a terrible time for me. And they were right there for me in their own special, each in their own special way. I'm so grateful as a man to have such close friends in my marriage and in my friendship group, because I know a lot of men who don't have them. I think, what's the secret? I think you've got to go and find them and work at it. I mean, Pete and I meet regularly every Saturday morning, and Pete and Mark, the 2 medicos, we have what we call a 3 amigos dinner. We all get together and have dinner regularly, take it in turns to organise. By intention we catch up. But we also see each other camping and boating and at the cricket and various other things. But I'm also very grateful. That question was about closest friends, but I have lots of good friends. especially through sport, different football clubs, university, the life members, for example, and the players I used to coach when I was varsity coach, Swan Districts. I have friends from work, a lot of friends through the Fathering Project, interestingly. Friends from school I grew up with. I have a huge array of friends, and I value them hugely, and I wish I could spend more time with them. I have friends through the church and Christian organisations, particularly I'd say the Christian Leadership Forum that I'm in. We're all very close, and it's a very caring and close, open, honest group, which I value hugely. What music at my funeral? Well, I have 3. I've always loved The Swan from Carnival of the Animals by Saint-Saëns. Still just intoxicates me, really. So I'd love to have that beautiful piece of music played. And people will joke that it's because Swans, which is my football team, of which I'm the patron and which I've followed since I was a kid and where I grew up. Not really. It's not really to do with that, although it's hard not to imagine that might come up in discussion. The importance of football and sport and Swan Districts to me. But no, The Swan by Saint-Saëns is a beautiful piece of music, and I'd love to have that played. Schubert's Serenade, Schwanensang, D957. I love that piece of music. I've sort of really only discovered it in the last few years. That also intoxicates me. The other piece of music I'd like played is Gabriel's Oboe by Ennio Morricone from the movie The Mission. And I still remember the scene where he climbs up this cliff from a river in South America and crawls over the cliff and then plays his oboe. And why? It's a beautiful piece of music, but it's also symbolic for me because this guy, a Catholic priest hundreds of years ago, was really courageous and set out to care for the poor. He was by himself and he cared for these poor people who'd never, ever, they were completely unreached. Of course, he's a Catholic priest, so he was reaching out for their spiritual growth, but also he helped them in their fight against the tyranny of the poor. I can't remember that movie now, whether he was killed in the process or not. But that's not the point. His courage inspired me from that movie. And Gabriel's Oboe, it's a beautiful piece of music, but it represents that sort of courage to reach out, go beyond yourself, to make a difference. That's why I like Gabriel's Oboe.